Okay. So, now that we've started exploring what mindfulness is, both experientially and definitionally, a little bit, I do want to talk about the science just very briefly, because it's great that we can have faith that this works, and certainly people have been doing this for thousands of years, so that's a pretty good indicator that something useful is going on here. But it's also really important to know that there's research on this. We don't need to go just on some faith in a tradition. So, specifically with mindfulness and with a program that's kind of the gold standard program of mindfulness training, which is called mindfulness based stress reduction, which is actually led by John Kabat-Zinn, who I quoted in the previous video. There's been a ton of research on people with chronic conditions of all kinds. And in general, with people with chronic conditions, this has repeatedly been shown to help people manage their symptoms and improve people's quality of life. And I'm talking across the board. Now, specifically with type 1 diabetes, there's great research, various papers that have shown that this really does help improve people's quality of life and reduce the stress that they feel, particularly from just having type 1 diabetes. And I won't go into all the different papers now, but we can put up some links separately to some of these papers. Now, some of these studies have actually gone so far as to say, yes, this seems to have an impact on A1C, which, as we know, is one measure of blood sugar over time. Some of them have said that we weren't able to detect any change in A1C that's significant scientifically. And often that's the case when they haven't actually gone into enough time beyond the study where the participant gets to practice for a substantial period of time. So, in any case, the research seems at the very least quite clear that this is able to help us live better lives and reduce any psychological distress that comes naturally from having type 1 diabetes. So people with type 1 diabetes are unfortunately 3 times more likely to have depression and anxiety and 40 to 50% more stress than the average person. And that's just the facts. So it's very important for us to start to address these things and say, all right, how do we recognize that as reality, just like welcoming the moment in mindfulness? How do we say, yes, okay, and now what? What do we do that's wise action? And mindfulness is one way that we can take care of ourselves within that. So the other thing that I would like to say scientifically is that we have this vagus nerve, and it's actually more than one nerve. It's a nerve bundle that goes from our brains to our body. And that connects to our facial muscles. It's also very responsible for our breath rate and our heart rate, and very important connecting to our internal organs. And most of that is actually sending information up to our brain to tell us how things are. How are we doing? And our blood sugar can actually impact what our vagus nerve is sensing, or what our vagal nerves are sensing and sending to our brain. And sometimes it's sensing that through our breath rate and our heart rate, both of which change when our blood sugar changes. Those things just naturally change. Using this mindfulness practice, we can actually work backwards and alter it in a different way to send a different message to our brain of what's going on. Because that same nerve is then telling our brain, all right, do we need to run, or do we need to fight, or do we need to just completely shut down, going even further in that direction? Or are we safe, and can we rest and digest, and can we be playful, and can we be calm? So mindfulness practice is another way. Our blood sugar can have one impact on that, going in this direction, which can be challenging sometimes for our brain. And mindfulness practice can push it back the other way a little bit. And it's interesting to use that word of mindfulness practice being this active pushing, it's not really doing that, but just by bringing awareness and attention, we can mitigate against some of the effects of how our blood sugar is impacting our brain. So anyways, I'm talking about all of this science, but when it comes down to it, eventually over time, we do this practice because it can be kind of a source of comfort for us. It can be a refuge of sorts. So sometimes when I guide meditation, I speak about the breath and attention on the breath being kind of like a home or a home base for us. And, that sounds great. And at first, it doesn't really feel like a home for us. It feels like this slippery, can't keep a track of our breath. But eventually, it actually does start to feel like that. And it feels familiar and comfortable. And that's one of the benefits of doing this over time. So I'm going to read a quote really quickly here. And this is from famous clinical psychologist Peter Levine. And after I read the quote, we'll get set up and do a little experiment here. So you can actually start now as I'm reading the quote by just getting in a comfortable seat, or if you need to find a different room to be in, to just have 5 to 10 uninterrupted minutes. So I'm going to read this quote here. And the quote is, and I'm going to paraphrase some parts so it's a little less sciencey because he uses very sciencey language. He says, "I learned that not only are people able to become aware of their internal bodily states, which is what we're doing here, but that cultivating perception is essential to taming various difficult sensations and emotions. In order to change our emotional states, it is essential to develop a reliable awareness of our body's internal states." That's really powerful, and I do want to be clear that in mindfulness practice, our intention isn't to be changing states. But this can be a very useful tool, and sometimes we can notice that things just naturally change once we start to put our attention on them. So if you're in a comfortable position, I want you to just let your eyes get relaxed. You can let them close if you like. You can start to pay attention to your breath, wherever you're getting in the habit of paying attention to it, maybe your belly or chest or ribs or through your nostrils. Again, like before, just noticing what it's like to breathe. Something we often take for granted. You can also, at the same time, or alternating, pay attention to your own body weight. And you might kind of feel that, feeling your weight on your seat, whether it's a cushion or chair. You might feel your feet or your shins on the ground. Just noticing that pressure, letting yourself rest into it, letting yourself kind of be held up by the structures of your body and the chair and the ground. Coming back to your breath. starting to pay attention to some of the other physical sensations going on, especially in your torso and through your throat area. So maybe you're noticing your shoulders might be tight or slouched over. No need to change any of that. Just notice. You might notice some cramping in your back or rib, or your belly is feeling full or unsettled. Still noticing the way all of these things are changing with the breath. You may notice if your throat is feeling open or feeling constricted. However it is great. It just is that way. That's all we're paying attention to right now. Noticing what our neck is feeling like. Is it tight or is it relaxed? Warm or cool? Maybe we can feel the hairs on our neck. And again to the shoulders. What do our shoulders feel like? Letting our attention work its way down through the chest, and again resting on the belly. Do I feel warmth or turning or moving in my belly right now? And we're going to stay in this state of noticing, of awareness. We're going to do another little experiment here. While we keep paying attention to our feelings in our belly and shoulders and throat and neck, we're going to bring this to our everyday life. So what I want you to do is to slowly let your eyes drift open, but keeping as much awareness as you can on what your body's feeling like. And I want you to go and reach for your blood sugar monitor. For those of you who have type 1 diabetes, if it's not in the room, you can feel free to pause. Again, maintaining or constantly coming back to those sensations through our shoulders and neck and throat and belly. I want you to go through the process of actually testing your blood sugar now, paying attention the whole time to your breath and to those bodily sensations. Testing our blood sugar at this point is like clockwork. We don't need to think about it. So we can pay attention to our breath and our sensations while we're doing it. So go for it. Start to test your blood sugar and notice what you're feeling. I'm going to go through this process myself and tell you what I'm feeling. But notice what you're feeling as you're going through that. So as I go to click, I notice some warmth and heat and tightness in my lower belly. And I click on it. And I see my blood sugar and I feel it kind of dropping. And I noticed that I was holding my breath for a minute as I was waiting for the result. And I feel a lot of sensation kind of coming up through my heart and into my throat. Feeling a little more constricted, a little more tight. And I would call it kind of a disappointment or maybe upset for me in this case of what my blood sugar is. And your blood sugar might have been great. So maybe you were noticing some relief. But whatever it is, especially noticing those moments, and we can take this practice with us at any time. So I challenge you to do this for the next few times you remember that you're testing your blood sugar, to pause for a minute and see, am I holding my breath? Am I tightening in the belly? Do my shoulders come up? As I start to pay attention to this. Because these are the very same patterns that then set us up to have certain reactions and feelings about how our blood sugar is. So I want you to play with that. I'll see you in the next video.